Hi, I'm Fernando.
Hi, I'm Alisella.
And I'm Ugo Akpen.
And we are presenting about African American history.
There are many geographical reasons why slavery would be more prevalent in some places than it would be in others. For instance, if we just look at the South, we can see that the warm climate and weather allowed for crops such as tobacco, rice, and cotton to be produced in a more frequent rate. This frequent rate meant that plantation owners had to go and search for workers to match the production of the crops. This meant slavery. Having them work severely high hours for a severely low wage, made it economically smart for the plantation owners, and of course, meant for harsh labor for slaves. If we look in the north, it was less suitable for crops as they focused more of the industry aspects. So this meant coal-powered machines and just factories in general, which they had workers to run the factories and the machines. And also, in contrast, the North colonies were more diverse than the South, of course, which with aspects like trade, commerce, and small circle farming, which meant reducing the dependency on slave labor for the North than the South.
There are demographic reasons as to why slavery was more prevalent in other areas and some not so much. And to start off, demographics refer to the special characterization of what is shared within a given population. So I will be going over the different demographics that both the North and the South shared. So population demographics in the north, they all share this diverse immigration population in which they would come from England, Scotland, Ireland, the Netherlands, Germany, and Scandinavia. Meanwhile, in the south, there are mainly English settlers that were there initially, which led to a less diverse population. And the demographic for labor demands was in the southern colonies. They heavily relied on labor intensive crops that required a really big workforce. So society structured around wealthy landowners as the backbone of the economy, and it had a hierarchical society there. Meanwhile, in the northern colonies, it was very diverse in the sense that it was not just focused on agriculture. So they would have jobs diversified in trading, manufacturing, small scale farming, and it led to a less greater demand for enslaved labor. And for migration and settlement in the southern colonies, especially through the transatlantic slave trade, they met the demand for labor in the plantation economy. Meanwhile, in the northern colonies, while slavery existed, its prevalence was comparatively lower due to the less demand of agriculture work needed. So the combination of these demographic factors contributed to the variation of the prevalence of society and slavery amongst the 13 colonies. And yeah.
There are many economic reasons why it become more prevalent in some areas, like the South, than others, like the North. So Southern colonies' economy heavily relied on agriculture and cash crops such as tobacco, cotton, and more. So this demanded a significant labor force for cultivating and harvesting these cash crops, and slavery was their ticket to that. In fact, they provided a cheap and endless labor source for plantation owners, and they liked that, and it ensured profit in a labor-intensive industry. However, in the north, they didn't really rely on cash crops. Instead, they were a lot more diverse. The economy was a lot more diverse with trade and commerce. They had a small-scale farming, and that reduced the dependence on slave labor. Another thing to note is that profitability also played a big role on how the economy affected slavery as well, especially in the South where they relied on these cash crops for their source of income. They would rather have slaves to do the work for them than to buy other maybe factories or other sources or other methods to complete the same work in a cheaper way. And since slaves were a lot more cheaper, it was much easier, much more beneficial, and more profitable to have slavery rather than other things. So that's also why slavery was a lot more prominent in the South rather than the North.
So, to answer the second question of our prompt, we chose about King Cotton. So, as we know, in 1834, the emerging Gulf states that they had become King Cotton. So, what even is King Cotton and what is that term used for? In the 1800s, King Cotton was a big deal in the southern US because it basically meant that cotton ruled both economically and politically. And this term captures how crucial cotton is because in the South's economy, it shaped their politics and it was their form of currency. So cotton became super important because of this machine called the cotton gin, and it was invented and it was made processing cotton a lot easier. And since technological advancements were so great, the southern states really heavily relied on it so that they could increase their global cotton scene. And making money from cotton farming made slavery even more apparent in the South because there's this crazy demand for workers on every cotton farm. And King Cotton didn't just impact the economy, it also influenced how folks in the South processed their thoughts about politics, and the success of cotton made those who owned slaves even more powerful politically. And King Cotton really just blew up before the Civil War, showing how the South relied on cotton and how tangled up slavery was in the cotton game.
So a reason for the crop's dominance in the South and the South's attachment to this one crop market was due to how profitable it was. When you have technical advancements like the cotton gin, it's so much easier to make production way easier and more efficient during all that process. So what this means that when there's an increase in the demand of cotton, and the profitability increases in other markets other than the South, so that means that that the South would just become more reliant in it, as it's just bringing in much benefits and with such high demand. Another reason for the cotton's dominance over the South and the South's attachment towards cotton was due to the market that it provided the South. So what this means, when the global textile industry is just doing so good, that means that cotton was the all-time high in production and the want for cotton. So this means that if you're in the South and the plantation owners and people working on producing cotton, that means so your priorities are more towards the cotton and you want to grow the needs. So this means that expanding plantations in expense for agricultural lands. So this means chopping down agricultural lands and placing machinery and just buildings to meet the needs of these people that want your cotton. And so this again made big profit for the plantation owners and for the people that are producing the cotton, as it was an all-time high in wanted.
Expansion of the cotton industry was deeply intertwined with the institution of slavery. And this labor-intensive nature of cotton cultivation, it required a really large workforce, and plantation owners relied heavily on enslaved labor to work on the fields. And also, we have to keep in mind that the profitability of cotton reinforced the dependence on enslaved labor, and this heavily and surely solidified the South's attachment to the one crop market, further their attachment to having slaves. And this reliance on cotton has significant consequences for the South. It made the region a lot more vulnerable to fluctuations in the global market, because any little disruption or decline in cotton demand could severely impact the Southern's economy. So they heavily relied on cotton, mainly meaning they had a heavy dependence on slaves as well. And because of this, it really hindered their ability to have agility, to adapt to change and adapt to different economic conditions in the long term. And overall, the combination of technological advancements and international demand for cotton and the reliance on enslaved labor contributed it heavily contributed to the domination of the Southern economy by cotton and the attachment to the one crop market.
We hope you enjoyed our presentation.